Bible's out, turn to the book of 2 Kings. We'll be starting this morning. Book of 2 Kings, chapter 6. 2 Kings, chapter 6. Last time we looked at our duty towards those that are afflicted. And now we're going to look at the topic of afflictions. Afflictions. And there are many and various and sundry things that deal with afflictions, and we're going to go through those to help you understand afflictions and how they are designed to work on us. And they do indeed work on us, both physically and spiritually. They're designed to work on us. So let's look at afflictions and look at 2 Kings chapter 6. Go down to verse number 31. Here's a woman now. It says, then he said, well, this is a man. Then he said, God do so and more also to me, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, shall stand on him this day. So what's he saying? I'm going to kill Elisha. All right? Everybody remember who Elisha was? He was Elijah's replacement. Elisha. He was there and witnessed Elijah being translated into heaven by that chariot of fire. He picked up the mantle of Elijah and put it on him. Remember, he prayed for a double portion of Elijah's spirit, and he took that mantle and he smote the river and it parted and he went across. All right, this is that man, Elisha. Now he says, this king is saying, I'm going to take care of him. I'm going to get him. But Elisha sat in his house, and the elders sat with him. And the king sent a man from before him. But ere the messenger came to him, he said to the elders, see ye how this son of a murderer has sent to take away mine head? Look, when the messenger cometh, shut the door, and hold him fast at the door. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him? And while he yet talked with them, behold, the messenger came down unto him. And he said, behold, this evil is of the Lord. What should I wait for the Lord any longer? Then Elisha said, hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord. Now, how would you feel if you knew that a man was coming and you knew that this messenger was just a deceit, a delay until the king got there and chopped off his head? Now, what would you do? Well, most of us would panic and say, oh, me, and we just fall down and say, oh, I can't do anything anyway, I'm just going to die. Most of us would run or hide. But what does it say Elisha did? He just sat there. I said, now, when he comes, shut the door. Because you know, the king's men were right behind him. Then said Elijah, hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, in the gate of Samaria. Then our Lord, on whose hand the king leaned, answered the man of God and said, behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be? And he said, behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but shalt not eat thereof. And there were 4 leprous men at the entering in of the gate, and they said one to another, why sit we here until we die? Now, here's the scenario. The city's surrounded by the enemy. Recall, they had encamped and were trying to take Jerusalem. Now we get a picture here of this scene. Behind the scenes, Elisha has said and told what's going to happen the next day. The king had threatened to kill him, was going to kill him. But Elisha says, it's not going to work like that. This is what God says. So God's going to open up the windows of blessing. Now remember the 4 lepers. Everybody remember the story of the 4 lepers? Well, here's that story. The 4 lepers are sitting in the gate and said, if we go in the city, we're going to starve to death. They won't let us in anyway. But if we go to the Samaritans, maybe by chance they'll let us live and feel sorry for us and give us a little food. So they were in a quandary as to what to do. Finally, they decided to go to the enemy and see if they'd give them some food. And then what did they find when they got there? They rose up in the twilight to go into the camp, verse 5, of the Syrians. And when they were come to the uttermost part of the camp of Syria, behold, there was what? Nail gone. And the fascinating thing is that this army, which was a rich army, by the way, had left everything behind. Why? Well, look what happened, verse 6. It says, for the Lord had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots and noise of horses, even the noise of a great host. And they said one to another, lo, the king of Israel hath hired against us the kings of Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to come upon us. Wherefore they arose and fled in the twilight, left their tents and their horses and their asses, even the camp as it was, and fled for their life. In other words, they didn't take anything, they just jumped and run. Now think of this. Here's the man of God that's been threatened to lose his head. Here's the man of God that's had the opportunity to tell the truth, said, no, this is what's going to happen. Now that king or that lord that the king leaned upon said, how's that possible? It can't happen. And Elisha says, it can happen, but you're not going to experience it. But these people are. So here's these 4 lepers now in this camp. What would you do if you were one of those lepers? Hadn't had any food for days, probably getting close to starvation. And when you got leprosy, you've got that disease that's just gnawing on you and your parts are falling off, like your fingers and your toes and your hands and your arms. It just starts eating on you. And that's painful enough. You stop and think about it. They lived in pain every day. But here they are, they're starving to death. And they walk over to the camp expecting maybe to be beaten and all that kind of stuff, captured, killed. They were expecting to be killed, and what happens? They find a banquet table. Hey, let's go to this tent. And they went, everything they wanted, and then some. And then it finally came to them, verse 9, then they said one to another, we do not well this day is a day of good tidings, and we hold our peace. If we tarry till the morning light, some mischief will come upon us. Now therefore come, and we may go and tell the king's household. So they did that which was right. He said, we could stay here all day till tomorrow and enjoying this feast, or we should go and share this good news with the king. Now remember what's going on inside the city? Anybody remember what's going on? Cannibalism. They were eating their children. Things had gotten so bad. And when things get that bad, you know it's bad. When they had to eat their own children. So here they are, shut up in the city. The Syrians had them surrounded, and now they're waiting for deliverance. So this king has threatened to kill, the king of Syria has threatened to kill Elisha because Elisha was telling all their plans. So I'm going to chop his head off. And I'm going to send a messenger to delay him while I come and chop his head off. But Elisha knew what they were thinking. Elisha knew what the messenger was going to say. How did Elisha know that? God told him. I said, not only did God tell him, he says, you tell them this, that tomorrow you're going to see the windows of heaven opened up and be poured out. I said, now wait a minute. How can that happen when they're in starvation? How can that happen when they haven't had food and they've gone to cannibalism and eaten each other? How's that going to happen? Watch and see. That messenger, that Lord that leaned upon that man's king's, that the king leaned upon, he said, how could this be? He said, behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but shalt not eat thereof. In other words, what's going to happen then? It's going to die. So here we have God appointing these afflictions. Now think about these lepers. Why were these 4 lepers there in the gate? They didn't have anywhere to go. Think about this, being afflicted with leprosy and with hunger. Well, that's a double whammy, isn't it? But now they couldn't go in the city because they didn't have nothing. They were eating each other. If they went in there, they wouldn't get it. Nobody'd want to eat them. But they also knew that they'd starved to death because there was no food in there. So here they go over to the other side and say, ooh, look what we found. Boy, God's good. He's blessed us. We were expecting to get killed. Now, here we are. We've got the run of the whole camp. It's all ours. Finders, keepers, right? You see, we can get carried away in that too. We're getting carried away in the blessings of the Lord. But so here is an example of how God can appoint afflictions. Remember, Israel was surrounded, Judah was surrounded, Jerusalem was surrounded, and now God's turned it around because their king humbled himself and cried unto the Lord, and God delivered them. He didn't have to because of their wickedness, but he did deliver them. Then I want you to look at the book of Job. Job. I'll give you one more another set of verses for this thought. How God appoints afflictions. Job chapter 5. And go down to verse 6. Although affliction cometh not forth of the dust, neither doth trouble spring out of the ground. Yet man is born, what? Unto trouble, as the sparks fly upward. From the time a man is born until the time he dies, he's in trouble. Why is that? Why is a man born into trouble? Because we're born in sin. Because of Granddaddy Adam, we suffer the afflictions of the wicked, the lost. Why? We're born in sin. It's in our nature to sin. It's what we do. It's what we've done. It's what we've always done. It doesn't make it right, but it's what we've always done. God has made a way to make it right through Jesus Christ. But he said the trouble doesn't come out of the ground. That's not where the trouble is. The trouble's right in here. So God afflicts the wicked. I want you to see that. God afflicts the wicked. I would seek unto God, and unto God would I commit my cause. If you have an affliction, then what do? You go unto God. If God appoints an affliction unto you, and you want answers about that affliction, or ask what God has in it for you, then you go unto God. Now you can go to the preacher and say, what's going on, preacher? Why am I getting this, preacher? Why am I doing this, preacher? And the preacher's going to say, if he's honest, I don't know, but I know one that does. God knows. God appoints affliction, and God knows why. God has reasons for doing what he does. God is always just in his dealings with men. Remember what Romans 8:28 says? All things work together for God. Wait a minute, I just lost it. Romans 8:28. Let me get there. Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. So what's that mean? All things work together for good. Everything has a reason, and it's a good reason for who? for those whom God loves. When God does something such as an affliction to us, it has the designs of love upon it. Sure, there may be suffering, there may be persecution, there may be pain, there may be misery, there may be even death, but God has a purpose in all that He does for our good. Yes, remember we read there in John this morning, chapter 9, about that blind man being born. And the disciples said, well, who sinned, him or his parents? Neither. The man was afflicted with that blindness from birth to show the glory of Christ and His ability, His supernatural ability to heal him. Think of that. He was born blind in order to reveal the miraculous power of our Savior. God knows what He's doing. All right, now I want you to go back to Job and go over to chapter 11. And I want you to see this, that God dispenses these afflictions as He wills. In other words, it is God that chooses afflictions, how they're to go and where they're to go, and who they're to go upon. Job chapter 11 verse 10 says, if He cut off and shut up or gather together, then who can hinder Him? Now look at the question that's asked. If He cut off and shut up or gather together. In other words, if He shuts off the blessings of heaven, if He turns off the blessings of rain, or shuts up the harvest where nothing happens, if He closes the barn doors, let's say, and you can't get in, then God is in control. He knows. Who can stop God from what He will do? Can we stop Him by just saying, poor me? No. God understands the poor me. God knows that I'm going to be afflicted. God knows that He's going to put it on us to bear, but He also knows how much we can bear. Remember that verse over in that Paul gives us? It says, God knows those afflictions, and that He'll not put upon us more than we can bear. But for every affliction, He'll make a way out. Well, now, if God makes a way out, then there's a reason for being in the affliction to start with. And what is that reason? To teach us, to show us, to help us. Sometimes we need a good pruning, though, don't we? Look out there at them Bradford trees. They need a good pruning. Why? If they want to stay healthy, what happens if those limbs get too big on those Bradford trees? They start crashing, don't they? And it breaks, and it ends up killing the tree because of the breaks. But if you prune them, and prune them just right, then they'll keep growing, they'll grow back, they'll grow strong, they'll continue to grow. And just like anything else is the same way. A grapevine or anything, if you tend to it, and you keep it trimmed up, and you keep it in the right way, it will prosper. God knows how to prosper His children in the right way. And that's what Zophar here is saying. He says, if He cut off and shut up or gather together, then who can hinder Him? Nobody can stop God. He dispenses His will according to His will and His way. God is the one that decides what's right for us. Now, we don't get to say, God, what's right for us. God does. A lot of times we say, well, that ain't fair, God. I didn't want that. I don't need that. But if God says you do, then you need it. We want to argue with God most of the time, don't we? I'll say, God, no, that ain't for me. I want this, or I want that. I want that pink Cadillac, or I want that mansion on the hill. I don't want any of that suffering stuff. I don't want to go through that valley of death. I don't want to go through all that. I want to have all the mountaintop experiences. But what happens to get to a mountain, you have to go through the valley to go to the top, don't you? And you're growing what happened in the valley while you're going to that place of the mountaintop. All right, another one that we can look at, if you will, look at Isaiah 45 and 7. Isaiah 45 and 7. An interesting word here. We made this point. I want to go to verse 6 to make this point that we made in Sunday school this morning. That they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, and what? What's that mean? I'm Jehovah. There's no one else. There's no other gods. Now look, if you will, it says, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace. Now notice this next phrase, and create what? I, the Lord, do all these things. Now that word there is interesting. Does God do evil? No. Does God create evil? No. But notice this word here. Write down this number if you study. Hebrews 7:451. Write that down. Hebrews 7:451. And that word means afflictions, calamities, displeasure, grief, or misery. God can grant those things. Sometimes God allows the devil to get in your hedge. Job is a perfect example of that. Had Job sinned when the devil got done cleaning his tater patch? No. No. Job had done nothing wrong. As a matter of fact, God was telling the devil, hath thou considered my servant Job? And boy, the devil was chomping at the bit to get to Job, wasn't he? Couldn't get to him because God had him hedged in. Job was being blessed. He was living right. He was living righteous. He was doing what he was supposed to do. He was living an honorable life. And then wham, all of a sudden, he's going through all these afflictions. But God used Job to give us the example. Said you don't have to have everything given to you and then have it all taken away and still deny me. If you've got me, you've got all you need. Job still had God at the end, didn't he? And what happened to Job at the end? He had twice as much as before. So Job went through all of that and was blessed at the end. By the way, he had to pray for those friends of his. Well, they were real comfort when he was going through these sore trials, weren't they? What'd they do? Oh, you've sinned, Job. Oh, you're wrong, Job. You've done wrong. You've stole. You've stealed. You've done something to get this misery on you. You've sinned. And they hammered him and hammered him and hammered him. For all those chapters there in Job, you'll see them hammering him. Finally, God appears in the whirlwind, remember? And has a little conversation with them. He said, you guys are so-called friends I'm going to destroy. Unless Job intervenes for you, I'll destroy you. Well, now that's how much they had interfered in this affliction with Job. What should a friend do to somebody that's afflicted? Remember, we looked at that last week. We have a duty towards them to lift them up, to encourage them, to strengthen them, to let them know that you're praying for them. We have that duty. But you see, these four friends were doing the exact opposite. Boy, they were stomping Job while he was down. They weren't helping him. They were belittling him. They were cruelly treating him when he had done no wrong. But look again at Isaiah 45:7. It says, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. In other words, it is God that dispenses afflictions as he chooses. And he can afflict, he can inflict, he can do what he chooses. Because he is God. He made you. He has the right and the authority to rule over you, and he knows what you have need of. Remember, Jesus taught us, says, your Father in heaven knows what you have need of, but he would have you what? Ask him. He knows what to give you. He's not going to give you a scorpion if you're asking for bread. Or he's not going to do this but he will afflict us in correcting us in love. Now, how many of us like to go to the woodshed when we were growing up? Now, we all know what the woodshed is, don't we? Well, some of the young people might not know what the woodshed is. The woodshed was a place of correction. The woodshed usually is where you had to go out and get a hickory limb or whatever kind of limb that you were assigned to get, and you had to take it out to the woodshed and wait on Ma or Pa, one of them, to come out there and apply some discipline to your hide. And usually what happened once that discipline was applied? You learned something, didn't you? You learned not to do that again, or else you'd get some more of that discipline. Well, sooner or later, it's driven into you that you should stop doing that which causes that whipping. That's reinforcement. Now, nowadays, that's cruel and inhumane treatment, isn't it? To do your children like that. Nowadays, they'd probably lock you up for whipping your children with a limb. So you got to remember that when God afflicts us, he does it out of love, and he does it for a reason. And sometimes we don't even know the reason. Job didn't know what was going on, did he? But he finally got to talk to God, and he said, whoop, I've said too much. I need to shut up. And he confessed that he had spoken out of turn with God, and God corrected him too. But in all that, remember, Job sinned not. All right? And then I want you to see this, that God regulates the measure of affliction. Go back to Psalm 80. Psalm 80 and verse 4. Psalm 80 and verse 4. This is Asaph. Everybody remember Asaph? Over there in Psalm 73, he's the one that said, here I am in sackcloth and ashes, and there goes them rascals, and they're having a party. Here I am afflicted. Here I am weeping and mourning over Israel, and the Israel's over there partying. How come, Lord, you don't hurt them? Why am I getting afflicted? So Asaph asked that question. It's that same Asaph here. Notice down in verse number 4, O Lord, God of hosts, how long wilt thou be angry against the prayer of thy people? Thou feedest them with the bread of what? Tears. And give them tears to drink in great measure. Thou makest us a strife unto our neighbors, and our enemies laugh among themselves. Turn us again, O Lord God of hosts, and cause thy face to shine, and we shall be saved. Why had God turned his face against Israel? Sin. God had turned his blessings off, turned the faucet off. And you'll find God's not going to bless you while you're in sin. He was afflicting them because of their sins. He was causing them to be mocked and laughed at by the enemies that they had around them. He was showing them that they deserved this bread of affliction. They deserved the bread of tears because of all the sin that they had committed. They needed to be afflicted to get their hearts back right with God. And here's Asaph now crying out, how long, God? You see, Jeremiah did that. Daniel did that. Ezra did that. Nehemiah did that. They prayed those great prayers, and God heard them and gave them their answers. Jeremiah finally found out how long that they would be in captivity. Anybody remember how long it was? 70 years. Or Daniel found that out through Jeremiah. Jeremiah wrote it down. Can you imagine Jeremiah as he's writing that down? Oh, 70 years? 70 years they're going to be in captivity. 70 years they're going to be enslaved. 70 years they're going to be estranged from their homeland. 70 years is a long time. How long has it been now? Think about it. There are still those Jews that got scattered that are just starting to come back in this century, in the past century. Since 1948, when Israel became a nation, they began to come back a little at a time, and they're still coming back. But that generation is not going to pass away until the Lord comes back, is what it says. And all these things come to bear. Let me give you one more verse now. Look at Isaiah 9. One more verse, Isaiah 9. And look at verses 1 and 2. Now in this chapter, verse 6, you'll see the prophecy of the Messiah. Verse 1 says, "Nevertheless, the deadness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan in Galilee of the nations. The people that walked in darkness have" what? Seen a great light. They've seen hope. They've seen hope. They've seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. Thou hast multiplied the nation and not increased the joy. They joy before thee according to the joy in harvest, and as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. For thou hast broken the yoke of his burden, and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor as the day of Midian. For every battle of the warriors with confused noise and garments rolled in blood. But this shall be with burning and fuel of fire, for unto us a child is born. This is that great promise that the Messiah is going to come straighten things out. Now when he came, boy, they didn't treat him very well, did they? But when he comes again, what's going to happen? He's going to treat them with a rod of iron. He's going to rule and reign over them, and they're not going to like it. They abused him. They mocked him. They scourged him. They whipped him. They placed that crown of thorns upon him and beat it with a reed. They made fun of him as he's hanging there on the cross. They plucked the beard out before he got on that cross. Remember, they plucked his beard out by the handfuls. And they hit him with that thorny crown to where he was bleeding from every part of his scalp. He was bleeding all over where they had smote him with the palms of their hands. Yet not a bone of him was broken. But he died upon that cross. He willingly died. Even before that spear went up into his heart sac, he had already given up the ghost. Before they put that spear in his side, he had already died for us. Then they put that spear up to make sure he was dead. And them Romans were professionals. How can you just pass out if you had a spear stuck in your heart? That's a verification that Christ actually died, isn't it? When they said he's dead, them Romans knew whether somebody was dead or not. He wasn't in no coma. He had already given up the ghost before they got there. Then they stuck that spear up in there. He couldn't be faking. Once you stick that spear up in your heart sac, what's going to happen? You're going to die if you're not dead already. But they made sure. And so God regulates the measure of our affliction. He's in charge. He knows how much is enough and how much and when to stop. Thank God for that. Afflictions aren't fun. But remember this, they have a reason, they have a remedy, and that is God. God appoints them, God gives them out as he wills, and then God regulates the measure of our afflictions. So think about that this morning. Let's all stand.